Imagine you're a British tourist on a weekend city break. You're walking through a bustling shopping district in Amsterdam, noticing the different architecture, the street signs in another language, and you're taking in the sights. You turn a corner onto a major high street, and staring back at you, occupying a piece of premium real estate with bright lights, is a giant logo that you've not thought about in over 2 decades. You see CNA. If you grew up in the UK during the 1980s or 90s, seeing a CNA in the wild now feels like spotting a ghost. It's a brand so deeply buried in the graveyard of British retail that finding one alive and packed with shoppers in another country causes genuine curiosity. In the collective memory of the British public, a CNA died a long time ago when it was swept away alongside Woolworths, BHS, and other fallen giants of the high street. Yet, the brand never actually died at all. Instead, it packed its bags, abandoned the UK entirely, and continued to build a massive, highly profitable fashion empire across mainland Europe, making Britain a bizarre, catastrophic anomaly in the history of this retail titan. This is the story of how an unstoppable European brand walked into the UK market, lost a massive price war, and was forced into an unprecedented retreat. The C and A actually stand for Clemens and August Brenninkmeier, the founders of a fiercely guarded, privately owned empire. The Brenninkmeier family traces its roots deep into the 1600s, operating as highly successful, intensely private textile traders in northern Holland. The modern brand finally took shape in 1841 in the Dutch town of Sneek, when brothers Clemens and August used a loan from their father to sell linens and cotton fabrics. Working initially as traveling merchants, they hauled their inventory from farm to farm, quietly building a loyal customer base and securing enough capital to open their first physical storefront in 1860. The brothers capitalized on the invention of the sewing machine to manufacture ready-to-wear fashion at a time when the standard practice was relying on local tailors for custom garments. They provided standardized sizing to a working-class demographic that had previously been entirely priced out of high-quality clothing. They operated with intentionally thin profit margins and relied heavily on immense sales volumes, generating substantial revenue that was continually reinvested into manufacturing capabilities and property acquisition. As the company grew, the Brenninkmeier family introduced customer-friendly return policies and utilized widespread print advertising to guarantee high foot traffic, strategies that were highly unusual for the time period. The opening of their landmark store on Berlin's Alexanderplatz in 1911 served as a showcase for these modern shopping conveniences, introducing the European public to revolutionary concepts like self-service, mechanical cash registers, and escalators. The scale and efficiency of these operations transformed the act of buying clothes from a basic necessity into an accessible leisure activity. But behind those welcoming storefronts, the internal corporate structure was locked down with absolute paranoia. The Brenninkmeier family refused to take the company public or allow outside investors anywhere near the business, ensuring the board of directors was staffed exclusively by blood relatives. By the time the Brenninkmeiers directed their attention toward the United Kingdom, they possessed an immense war chest and an operational blueprint they believed was flawless. They prepared to cross the channel with the expectation that they would deploy their proven methods and conquer the British high street with the exact same efficiency they'd experienced throughout mainland Europe. CNA officially crossed the English Channel and opened its first British store at Marble Arch in London in 1922. The timing was highly strategic. The UK was recovering from the First World War, the economy was shifting, and there was a massive growing demand for affordable, quality clothing among the working and middle classes. The British public quickly embraced the brand, affectionately giving it the nickname Coats and Hats due to its initials and its reputation for reliable winterwear. For decades, it served as the absolute anchor of the British high street, becoming the default destination where families went to buy their winter coats, their school uniforms, and their everyday basics. The company understood how to ingratiate itself into the local culture, and they built massive multi-level department stores in prime locations, becoming the focal point of local shopping districts from Birmingham to Glasgow. Throughout the post-war economic boom of the 1950s and 60s, CNA grew to become one of the most recognizable retail brands in the country. They provided a safe, reliable shopping experience that appealed to a broad demographic, and the brand aimed squarely at the middle of the market by providing decent quality garments at prices the average household could comfortably afford. The company felt invincible during this golden age, embedding themselves deeply into the cultural fabric of the country as they generated massive revenues and expanded their physical footprint to over 100 locations across the UK and Ireland. But that ever-expanding physical footprint would eventually become the exact trap that destroyed them. During the 1970s and 80s, C&A's financial dominance relied entirely on the sheer scale of the traditional high street department store, with standard locations demanding tens of thousands of square feet just to function. By stockpiling massive amounts of inventory within these cavernous spaces, they created a comprehensive one-stop shop experience that transformed them into anchor tenants of major shopping centers. Their massive presence guaranteed high foot traffic, which in turn brought vital business to the smaller surrounding shops, making this vast real estate portfolio an undeniable advantage during the golden era of the high street. Yet, as the market began to shift, that exact reliance on massive, multi-level physical spaces transformed into a suffocating logistical trap. Operating on a densely populated island with strict urban planning laws and a highly competitive real estate market meant that maintaining these giant stores required enormous overhead costs. The math worked perfectly as long as the aisles were packed with people buying clothes at full price, generating enough revenue to easily cover the massive rent, lighting, heating, and wages for hundreds of staff members. However, this inflexible physical model left the company highly vulnerable to any sudden changes in consumer behavior. The moment foot traffic dropped or profit margins were squeezed, those locations instantly flipped from massive revenue generators into crippling financial liabilities. And that tide changed violently in the late 1990s. Instead of the traditional family shopping trip to a single department store, C&A entered a steady decline in the UK market as it came under pressure from both established competitors like Marks & Spencer, Arcadia Brands, and Next, and a new wave of discount retailers such as New Look, Matalan, Peacocks, and Primark. These newer chains attracted shoppers with more fashionable clothing at lower prices, while C&A increasingly shifted toward what critics described as safe clothes, making its offer feel less relevant to changing consumer tastes. Simultaneously, a massive threat dragged the rest of the market downward, emerging from an entirely unexpected sector: the grocery industry. Supermarkets realized that they could weaponize their massive out-of-town warehouses to sell apparel alongside food, and the launch of Asda's George clothing line proved that British consumers were perfectly happy throwing a £5 t-shirt into their trolley right next to their weekly groceries. By leveraging their immense buying power to drive manufacturing costs down to absolute rock bottom, these supermarkets effectively commoditized basic clothing overnight. This created a toxic pricing environment that C&A fundamentally couldn't survive in. The Brenninkmeier family had built their entire 80-year philosophy on providing fair value for quality goods, relying on tight margins and high volume. But when the supermarkets introduced this ultra-low pricing model, they completely reset the British public's expectation of what a garment should cost, suddenly making a basic shirt at C&A look unreasonably expensive compared to what's sitting right next to the produce aisle in Asda. But the assault on C&A's pricing model didn't stop there. A new breed of aggressive discount chains arrived to drag the budget-conscious shopper even further downward, with massive out-of-town superstores like Matalan and the explosive growth of Primark completely rewriting the rules of retail engagement. These new competitors operated with a ruthless focus on cost-cutting by utilizing basic warehouse layouts to dodge prime real estate rents while sourcing them from the cheapest possible overseas manufacturers. By fully embracing the emerging concept of fast fashion, they turned inventory over at breakneck speeds and sold garments at prices that would instantly bankrupt a traditional retailer. This relentless pressure from the bottom, combined with the aspirational pull from the top, suddenly trapped C&A in a retail no man's land. Their clothing was no longer cheap enough to compete with the sheer volume and rock-bottom pricing of the discount warehouses, yet their brand completely lacked the prestige needed to rival the trendy new specialist chains. As a result, the company suffered a long, agonizing decline in market share. Shoppers increasingly viewed the sprawling stores as outdated relics, leaving the brand bleeding cash and reporting massive yearly losses as foot traffic evaporated. But while the market conditions were undeniably hostile, C&A compounded the crisis by inflicting massive damage upon itself through a series of disastrous corporate decisions. In a desperate attempt to cut costs, streamline operations, and fight back against the discounters, the company made a fundamental error in 1996 that effectively sealed its fate. They decided to completely centralize their buying team, stripping the UK division of its long-held autonomy to select clothing lines that catered specifically to British tastes. All purchasing power was suddenly yanked away from local managers, the very people who actually understood the nuances of the UK fashion cycle, and relocated to corporate offices in Dusseldorf and Brussels. The logic assumed that selling the exact same styles across all European markets would create massive economies of scale. By ordering millions of identical units, they could negotiate better factory prices and ultimately improve their profit margins. However, the reality on the shop floor resulted in a catastrophic misalignment with the customer base. The British fashion market was driven by customers who were highly trend-focused, heavily influenced by fast-moving pop culture, and eager for rapid turnover in their wardrobes. By forcing the UK stores to stock the exact same classic, enduring styles favoured by branches in rural Germany or suburban Amsterdam, the centralised buying team completely alienated the British shopper. To make matters worse, the British retail sector was rapidly entering an era defined by aggressive, relentless discounting. Unlike markets in Spain or France, where shoppers placed a high value on the overall store experience, the UK market had become increasingly utilitarian and heavily discount-led. In a final, desperate bid to fight back, C&A abandoned its traditional pricing model and dove headfirst into the price war. They plastered their store windows with giant red signs, slashed prices, and ran continuous clearance sales. While this occasionally generated long queues, it completely destroyed the remaining equity of the brand, training the customer base to never buy anything at full price. The crowds bursting through the doors were purely bargain hunters, picking over the carcass of a dying retailer, completely devoid of any brand loyalty. Company management eventually realized the British High Street had become completely incompatible with their business model, bringing a severe financial toll. In the first full year after the centralization disaster, the UK division began bleeding cash, with those losses compounding rapidly as the late 90s dragged on. By the year 2000, the brand had racked up £250 million in deficit over just 3 years, a figure large enough to threaten the stability of the wider European operation. To address the crisis, the highly secretive Brenninkmeier family convened in Brussels to review a balance sheet showing their British arm caught in an unwinnable war against both the aspirational chains and the budget supermarkets. This left the board with a strict binary choice between whether to fund another 5 years of massive losses to attempt a complete UK rebrand, or to finally admit defeat, cut the cord entirely, and protect their wider empire. They chose to protect the empire. On the morning of Thursday, June 15th, 2000, staff were called into emergency meetings across the country where management announced the immediate and total closure of all 113 stores across the United Kingdom and Ireland. Just like that, approximately 4,800 jobs were wiped out. John Edmonds, the General Secretary of the GMB union at the time, expressed absolute shock, saying, "This is a major blow for the employees and for the High Street as a whole." When forced to face the media, UK Managing Director Neil McCausland simply said, "This is a sad and difficult decision for the company." C&A has been part of the British High Street for over 75 years and was determined to remain so. Unfortunately, business conditions do not allow this to happen. This sudden announcement immediately triggered a massive nationwide liquidation sale. Shoppers flooded the stores one last time to pick the shelves clean, buying up discounted stock in a grim finale to an 80-year legacy. While the mass closure devastated employees and local high streets, it also revealed a brilliant piece of strategic maneuvering by the parent company. C&A realized that they had accumulated a massive hidden asset over the decades, by purchasing the majority of their prime retail sites outright. Because they owned these large buildings in the center of almost every major city in the UK, they were sitting on a real estate goldmine. By shutting down the entire retail operation in one swift move, the Brenninkmeier family executed a brilliant corporate pivot. Rather than completely liquidating their physical footprint, they transferred the ownership of their massive high street buildings into a newly formed family-owned real estate company called Redevco. They retained the freeholds for the vast majority of their 109 UK locations and instantly transitioned from a failing retailer into a highly successful commercial landlord. Within 6 months, they had relet millions of square feet of prime retail space to the exact competitors who had just defeated them in the price war. As expanding brands like Primark, Next, and H&M scrambled to take over the vacant locations, the parent company began collecting massive, ongoing rental income. They essentially turned the grave sites of their British retail division into a highly lucrative real estate empire, funneling that capital directly back into their profitable European operations. With the brands completely wiped off the British map, it's easy to assume that C&A was simply a failing company globally. But while the UK division was bleeding out, the mainland European operations were quietly printing money. The exact same business model that failed so spectacularly in London was actually thriving in places like Amsterdam, Paris, and Berlin. This European survival came down to a fundamental difference in consumer culture. On the continent, the dominant discount grocers like Aldi and Lidl were hyper-focused on food and basic household goods and completely ignored the apparel sector. Furthermore, the continental high street was still structurally anchored by massive mid-market department stores. Retail giants like Karstadt and Peek & Kloppenburg commanded immense market share in the year 2000 as German and Dutch shoppers were still actively spending within that traditional mid-tier bracket. Because the aggressive fast fashion and supermarket price wars that gutted the UK hadn't breached the continent, C&A was operating in a highly stable ecosystem. Their traditional model still made absolute mathematical sense, allowing them to maintain their necessary profit margins without ever engaging in a race to the bottom. Because they no longer had to burn through those healthy European margins to subsidize the failing UK division, the Brenninkmeier family was finally free to double down on their continental stronghold. They took the capital from their British real estate move and immediately applied the harsh lessons learned from the 1996 centralization disaster. Realizing that total standardization across borders was a wrong move, they shifted back to a localized strategy. They gave regional managers the flexibility to tailor inventory to local tastes while simultaneously investing heavily in modernizing the physical stores themselves. Outdated warehouse racking was ripped out and replaced with warmer lighting, better displays, and clearer signage. Recognizing that they couldn't win the fast fashion trend war against agile competitors like Zara or H&M, they focused entirely on dominating the market for reliable everyday wear. This strategic pivot secured their position as one of the largest fashion retailers across a dozen European countries. As the retail industry moved into the 2010s, C&A ensured their long-term survival by recognizing the growing cultural shift toward environmental awareness long before their competitors. They aggressively positioned themselves as global leaders in sustainable fashion, fundamentally restructuring how they procured materials to become the world's largest buyer of certified organic cotton. By implementing ethical manufacturing processes across their entire supply chain, they shook off any lingering perception of being an outdated discount brand. This move provided their European customers with a compelling, modern reason to stay loyal, offering a guilt-free shopping experience that captured a massive demographic of people who wanted sustainable clothing but couldn't afford premium eco brands. Today, C&A operates as a highly sophisticated retail machine that has aggressively adapted to the digital age. Under new leadership in the early 2020s, the company set ambitious goals to generate half of its total sales online, executing a ruthless optimization strategy to overhaul its physical portfolio by intentionally closing underperforming locations in secondary towns, instead focusing on experiential flagship stores in major European cities. These primary retail spaces were transformed to include comfortable lounge areas, hybrid checkouts, and seamless click and collect stations. By recognizing that a modern physical store needs to act as both a fulfillment center and a brand showroom, they successfully transitioned from a traditional high street staple into an omni-channel business, achieving the exact kind of logistical efficiency their British executives had failed to implement decades earlier. That historic failure in the UK serves as a brutal masterclass in the dangers of ignoring local market dynamics. While the Brenninkmeier family built an incredible empire, they made the fatal assumption that a strategy working flawlessly in Dusseldorf would automatically translate to Leeds. By completely failing to recognize that the British mid-market was evaporating, their stubborn reliance on centralized buying blinded them to the rapidly changing tastes of their core demographic. Yet, their mass exit in the year 2000 remains one of the cleanest corporate amputations in modern retail history. Rather than fighting a losing war of attrition in a fundamentally hostile environment, they chose to walk away and protect the profitable parts of their global business. This ruthless pragmatism is the exact reason why the brand continues to generate billions of euros in revenue today, simply because the board refused to let a failing division sink the wider ship. Today, the legacy of C&A in the UK is relegated entirely to memory. It survives only in old family photographs, in stories told by former employees, and in the jarring shock experienced by tourists who suddenly stumble across a thriving European branch. The entire saga stands as a permanent reminder that in the hyper-competitive world of retail, historical dominance guarantees absolutely nothing, and consumer loyalty only lasts exactly until a cheaper alternative opens up across the street. But what do you reckon? Do you have any fond memories of dragging your parents through a C&A to look at the Clockhouse range? Or did you abandon the brand the second the supermarket started selling clothes? Drop your experiences in the comments section below, because we love reading every single comment, and let us know about the best bargain you ever found on the high street. If you enjoyed this deep dive into business history, give us a like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next video. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay curious.